The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon. As Sophia Pierce stood in her small garden, dirt under her fingernails and sweat beading on her brow, wondering if tomorrow would finally bring enough customers to pay this month's rent. It was 1877 in Newton, Kansas, a railroad town that had seen its share of cowboys, outlaws, and everyone in between since the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway had arrived 3 years prior. The town that had once been wild was settling down, but life remained hard for a woman alone. Sophia's garden was her lifeline, a small patch of earth behind her modest cabin at the edge of town, where she coaxed flowers to bloom even in the harshest conditions. Roses, sunflowers, daisies, and wildflowers she'd collected from the prairie stretched in neat rows, a splash of color against the dusty Kansas landscape. At 23, she had already weathered more storms than most twice her age. "Just one more good day," she whispered to the flowers as darkness fell. "That's all we need." The small cabin had been her home for nearly a year now, ever since her father had passed. Jonathan Pierce had moved them west from Philadelphia after Sophia's mother died of tuberculosis, believing the clean air would keep his own lungs strong and give his daughter a fresh start. For a while, it had worked. He'd found employment as a clerk at the general store, and Sophia had learned to adapt to frontier life. But the coughing started last winter, and by spring, she had buried him in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Newton. With no family and few marketable skills in a town where women either married, taught school, or worked in establishments of questionable reputation, Sophia had turned to the one thing that brought her joy: her flowers. She sold them from a small cart in town, bouquets carefully arranged and tied with scraps of ribbon, earning just enough to keep herself fed and sheltered. Tomorrow was Saturday market day, and she needed a good haul. Mr. Finch, her landlord, had already extended her grace period by 2 weeks, his patience wearing thin with each passing day. Morning came with the distant whistle of the 6 a.m. train. Sophia rose from her narrow bed, splashed water on her face from the basin, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple bun. Her blue calico dress was faded but clean, patched in places but still presentable. She slipped on her worn boots, ate a quick breakfast of cornbread and jam, then headed out to cut her flowers. The early morning light cast long shadows across her garden as she selected the best blooms, careful to leave enough for seeds and future sales. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, filling her basket with vibrant colors. When she had enough, she loaded them into her small cart and began the half-mile walk into town. Newton was already bustling when she arrived. The cattle season was in full swing, and cowboys from the nearby ranches mingled with townsfolk and railroad men. Sophia set up her cart near the general store, arranging her flowers in tin buckets of water. "Good morning, Miss Pierce," called Mrs. Henderson as she passed by. "Those roses are looking lovely today." "Thank you, madam. Would you like one?" Sophia smiled, holding up a pale pink bloom. "Not today, dear. Perhaps next week." Sophia's smile remained fixed, though her heart sank a little. She needed sales today, not next week. Still, she nodded politely and turned her attention to other potential customers. The morning passed slowly. She sold a few small bouquets to townswomen, and even a single rose to a shy young man who was clearly mustering courage to call on a local girl. But by midday, she had made less than half of what she needed for rent. The sun beat down mercilessly as noon approached. Sophia wiped her brow with her handkerchief, considering whether to spend a few precious cents on a cup of water from the cafe. Before she could decide, the atmosphere in the street changed perceptibly. A group of cowboys rode into town, dust billowing around their horses. Most headed straight for the saloon, but one broke away from the group. He rode a magnificent chestnut stallion that pranced nervously on the busy street. The rider controlled the animal with ease, one hand resting casually on his thigh near his holster, a habit, Sophia guessed, rather than a threat. He dismounted gracefully in front of the general store, tying his horse to the hitching post. Sophia couldn't help but notice his tall, broad-shouldered frame as he removed his hat to wipe his brow. His hair was the color of wheat, and even from a distance, she could see that his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. The cowboy noticed her watching and nodded politely before entering the store. Sophia quickly averted her gaze, embarrassed to be caught staring. She busied herself rearranging her flowers, though there was really no need. A few minutes later, he emerged from the store carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. Instead of returning to his horse, he walked directly toward her flower cart. Sophia straightened, putting on her best merchant smile. "Good day, sir. Would you be interested in a flower? Or perhaps a bouquet?" Up close, he was even more handsome, with laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled often. He studied her flowers with genuine interest. "These are mighty fine blooms, miss. Didn't expect to see such colors in this dusty town." His voice was deep with a slight southern drawl. "Thank you. I grow them myself just outside of town." "You don't say." He picked up a sunflower, twirling it thoughtfully. "Name's Owen Prescott. Just hired on at the Diamond Cross Ranch about 10 miles west." "Sophia Pierce," she replied, extending her hand formally. Instead of shaking it, he took it gently and bowed slightly, a gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Pierce. How much for this sunflower?" "5 cents." Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin. "I'll take it." Sophia accepted the nickel, her fingers brushing against his calloused palm. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott." He tucked the sunflower into his vest pocket, where it looked comically large against his broad chest. "My mother always said a man should brighten a lady's day when he can. Seems to me buying a flower might brighten yours." Sophia blushed, unsure how to respond to his directness. "Well, you've certainly helped my business. I appreciate that." Owen lingered, studying her face as if memorizing it. "You said you grow these yourself. Must be quite a garden." "It's not large, but it's mine." Pride crept into her voice despite her efforts to remain professional. "My father taught me. He believed anything could grow with enough care and patience." Sounds like a wise man. He was. The simple past tense hung in the air between them, and understanding flickered in Owen's eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Pierce." Before Sophia could respond, a shout came from down the street. "Owen, get your hide over here. Jackson's buying around." Owen glanced over his shoulder at his fellow cowboys gathered outside the saloon, then back at Sophia. "Duty calls, I'm afraid, but I suspect I'll be needing more flowers soon. Good day, Miss Pierce." "Good day, Mr. Prescott." Sophia watched as he strode down the street, the sunflower bobbing in his pocket. Something about him lingered in her mind as she returned to her work. Perhaps it was his gentlemanly manner, so unexpected in a cowboy. Or perhaps it was simply that he had shown her kindness when she desperately needed it. The afternoon brought a few more customers, but as the sun began to sink, Sophia counted her earnings with a heavy heart. She was still $3 short of her rent. Mr. Finch would surely evict her now. As she began packing up her cart, a shadow fell across her flowers. She looked up to find Owen Prescott standing before her once more, his hat in his hands. "Miss Pierce, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Prescott. Did you need another flower?" She forced brightness into her voice, though her spirits were low. "Actually, I've been thinking." He cleared his throat, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "The boys and I are riding back to the ranch tonight and, well, tomorrow's Sunday, church day. And the ranch house could use some brightening up, especially with the boss's wife feeling under the weather lately." Sophia waited, not quite understanding where he was going with this. "What I mean to say is, I'd like to buy all your remaining flowers, every last one." He gestured to her cart. Sophia's eyes widened. "All of them, but that would be over $5 worth." "Is that too little?" Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I could go to 7 if that's fairer. No, I mean $5 is more than fair. It's just—" She stopped, not wanting to reveal her desperate circumstances. "Are you certain you want all of them?" Owen's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Yes, madam, I am, though I admit I might need help carrying them back to my horse." Still stunned, Sophia began gathering the buckets of flowers. Owen stepped forward to help, his hands dwarfing the tin containers. Together, they walked to his horse, where he secured the flowers with surprising care to his saddlebags. "You mind if I ask where your garden is, Miss Pierce, in case I find myself in need of more flowers someday?" Sophia hesitated only briefly before pointing westward. "It's about half a mile that way, a small cabin with a garden behind it. You can't miss it. It's the only splash of color for miles around." Owen nodded, committing the directions to memory. "I'm obliged, Miss Pierce." He reached into his pocket again and handed her a $5 gold piece. For the flowers. The coin felt heavy in Sophia's palm, salvation in the form of metal. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott, truly." He mounted his horse, the buckets of flowers swaying gently with the movement. "The pleasure's all mine." With a tip of his hat, he turned and rode toward the saloon where his companions waited. Sophia watched him go, the $5 piece clutched tightly in her hand. It was enough for the rent with a bit left over for supplies. A reprieve, if only temporary. Yet as she walked home with her empty cart, she couldn't help but wonder why a cowboy would spend so much on flowers, and why the thought of him possibly visiting her garden made her heart beat a little faster. The following week passed quietly. Sophia paid her rent, worked in her garden, and tried not to think too much about Owen Prescott. Cowboys were notoriously transient, moving from ranch to ranch with the seasons. Likely he had already forgotten about the flower girl in Newton. Saturday arrived again, and Sophia prepared for market day. Her garden had recovered from last week's complete harvest, though she didn't have quite as many blooms to sell. Still, she arranged them carefully in her cart and made her way into town, determined to build her savings in case another dry spell came. The market was quieter this week, no cattle drives were passing through, and the town had settled into its normal rhythm. Sophia sold a few bouquets but found herself watching the street more than usual, looking for a certain chestnut stallion and its rider. Around midday, a group of women from the church approached her cart. "Miss Pierce," said Mrs. Thornton, the minister's wife, "we're decorating the church for the harvest celebration next month. Would you be able to provide flowers for the occasion?" "I would be honored," Sophia replied, her mind already calculating how many blooms she would need to grow. "When would you need them?" As they discussed the details, a rider appeared at the end of the street. Sophia's heart leaped before she could check herself. But it wasn't Owen, just a freight driver making deliveries. She forced her attention back to Mrs. Thornton, chiding herself for her foolishness. By late afternoon, she had sold most of her flowers and was preparing to head home when a voice called out behind her. "Miss Pierce." She turned to find Owen Prescott striding toward her, looking somewhat out of breath. His clothes were dusty from the trail, suggesting he had ridden hard to reach town. "Mr. Prescott, this is a surprise." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. I apologize for my appearance. We've been moving cattle all week, and I only just convinced the foreman to let me make a supply run to town. No apology necessary. Sophia gestured to her nearly empty cart. I'm afraid you're a bit late if you were hoping for more flowers. Actually, he said, his blue eyes meeting hers, I came to ask a favor. The boss's wife, Mrs. Kavanaugh, she was mighty pleased with the flowers I brought back last week. Said they were the finest she'd seen since leaving St. Louis. She's been feeling poorly lately, expecting a child and all, and those flowers seemed to lift her spirits something fierce. Sophia smiled, pleased that her blooms had brought someone joy. The thing is, Owen continued, she was wondering if you might be willing to supply fresh flowers for the ranch house regularly. She'd pay well, of course. Yes, I could certainly do that, Sophia said, trying to contain her excitement. A regular customer, especially one who could afford to pay well, would change everything. That's wonderful news. I told her you would likely agree. His smile was warm, reaching his eyes. There's something else, too. I wondered if I might call on your garden tomorrow. I'd like to see where such beautiful things come from. Sophia felt her cheeks warm. My garden is hardly impressive, Mr. Prescott. I'd still like to see it if you're amenable. Yes, you're welcome to visit. She paused, realizing she hadn't considered the propriety of receiving a male visitor alone. Perhaps in the afternoon, after church services. Perfect. I'll be there. He glanced at her remaining flowers. And I'll take these as well if you're selling. Once again, Owen paid generously for her flowers, more than they were worth by any fair market value. As they parted ways, Sophia couldn't help but feel that something significant had just happened, though she couldn't quite name what it was. The next day, Sophia attended church in her best dress, a navy blue with white piping that she had carefully maintained since leaving Philadelphia. She listened to Reverend Thornton's sermon about the parable of the sower with unusual attention, her thoughts drifting to her own garden and the seeds of possibility that seemed to be sprouting in her life. After the service, she hurried home to prepare for Owen's visit. She swept the small cabin, put fresh wildflowers in a jar on her table, and even changed into her second-best dress, a light green that her father had always said matched her eyes. At precisely 3 o'clock, she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She stepped outside to see Owen riding toward her cabin, leading a second horse, a gentle-looking gray mare behind him. He was dressed in clean clothes, his hair still damp from what must have been a recent wash. "Miss Pierce," he called as he approached. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all." Right on time. He dismounted and secured both horses to the post near her well. "I brought Daisy along," he said, gesturing to the mare. "Thought we might ride out a bit if you were willing. The hills to the west have some wildflowers I thought might interest you." The offer surprised her. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Prescott. I haven't ridden in some time, though. Daisy's gentle as a lamb, and please call me Owen." "Then you must call me Sophia." He smiled at that. "Sophia it is. Now, I believe I was promised a tour of your garden." She led him around to the back of her cabin, where her garden stretched in neat rows. It wasn't large, perhaps 50 feet square, but every inch was cultivated with care. Late summer blooms created a patchwork of color. Asters, black-eyed Susans, roses still holding on despite the season, and prairie wildflowers she had transplanted and nurtured. Owen walked slowly among the rows, careful not to step on any plants. "This is remarkable," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Most folks out here barely manage to grow vegetables, let alone flowers. How do you do it?" Sophia knelt beside a row of asters, touching the soil with practiced fingers. "Good soil, regular water, and a lot of care." My father was a naturalist of sorts. He taught me everything I know about plants. When we came west, he made sure we brought seeds from back east. You said was, he's passed on, she nodded, her throat tightening slightly. Last winter, pneumonia. Owen knelt beside her, his presence solid and comforting. My pa died when I was 16, thrown from a horse. Ma followed 3 years later. Some days the missing them is so strong it feels like a physical ache. Yes, exactly that. Sophia looked up at him, surprised by his understanding. Does it ever go away? Not entirely, but it changes, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. He reached out and gently touched a pink rose bloom. These living things you tend, they're a fine tribute to him. They stayed in the garden for nearly an hour, Sophia pointing out different varieties and explaining her methods. Owen listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that revealed he knew more about growing things than the average cowboy. I grew up on a small farm in Kentucky, he explained when she commented on this. Wasn't much, but we grew our own food. Ma had a flower garden too, nothing like this, but she loved her roses. As the afternoon waned, Owen gestured to the horses. Still up for a ride? There's a view I'd like to show you before the light fades. Sophia hesitated only briefly before nodding. Let me change into my riding skirt. A few minutes later, she emerged in a divided skirt that allowed her to sit comfortably astride. Owen helped her mount Daisy, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. They rode west, away from town, and toward the rolling hills that marked the beginning of the vast prairie. Owen led them along a creek bed where cottonwoods provided occasional shade. He was a natural horseman, his body moving in perfect rhythm with his mount. How long have you been at Diamond Cross? Sophia asked as they rode. Just 3 months. Before that, I was with the Wallace outfit in the Texas Panhandle. Been working cattle since I was 17. Do you enjoy it? The cowboy life, he considered this for a moment. Parts of it. I love the open country, the horses, being my own man most days. The work suits me. He glanced at her. But it gets lonely, moving from place to place, never putting down roots. Is that what you want, roots? Been thinking about it more lately. His eyes held hers for a moment before returning to the trail. Up ahead, that's what I wanted to show you. They crested a small hill, and Sophia gasped at the view. The prairie stretched before them, a sea of golden grass rippling in the late afternoon breeze. But what took her breath away were the wildflowers, patches of purple, yellow, and white scattered across the landscape like stars in a golden sky. It's beautiful, she whispered. Thought you might appreciate it. Owen dismounted and helped her down from Daisy. Most folks just see grass and dirt. They miss all this. They walked among the wildflowers, Sophia identifying species she recognized and marveling at those she didn't. Owen produced a small folding knife from his pocket and offered it to her. Thought you might want to collect some seeds. Touched by his thoughtfulness, she accepted the knife and began carefully collecting seed pods, explaining to Owen which ones were ripe and which needed more time. He listened, occasionally pointing out plants she might have missed. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they reluctantly mounted their horses and headed back toward her cabin. The ride was quiet, comfortable, as if they had known each other far longer than the brief time they had. At her cabin, Owen helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for today, Sophia. I haven't enjoyed an afternoon so much in years. I should be thanking you. The wildflowers were magnificent. He shuffled slightly, hat in hand. About Mrs. Kavanaugh's request would once a week be manageable. I could come by on Saturdays after you finished at market. That would be perfect. Good. That's good. He hesitated, then added, "And perhaps if you're not opposed, I might call on you socially from time to time, when I'm in town." Sophia felt a flutter in her chest. "I would like that very much, Owen." His smile was like sunrise. "Then I'll see you next Saturday." He mounted his horse, Daisy's reins in hand. "Good night, Sophia Pierce." "Good night, Owen Prescott." She watched him ride away, the setting sun casting long shadows across the prairie. Something had changed that day, a seed planted in fertile soil. Whether it would grow into something lasting, only time would tell. But for the first time since her father's death, Sophia felt a spark of hope for something beyond mere survival. True to his word, Owen returned the following Saturday, and the one after that. Each week, he would meet Sophia after the market, purchase flowers for the Kavanaugh Ranch house, and spend time helping her in her garden or riding through the surrounding countryside. Sometimes they would picnic by the creek, sharing simple meals and complicated stories. He told her of his adventures driving cattle, of stampedes narrowly avoided, and the camaraderie of the bunkhouse. She shared memories of Philadelphia, of her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's passionate curiosity about the natural world. As September turned to October, the prairie began to change. The grasses turned golden brown, and Sophia's garden required more attention to protect the remaining blooms from early frosts. Owen helped her construct simple frames covered with burlap that could be laid over the most delicate plants on cold nights. "You're quite handy," she remarked as he hammered the last stake into place. "Farm boy, remember," he straightened, wiping his brow. "Besides, these flowers are important. Not just to you, but to Mrs. Kavanaugh. She says they're the only thing that makes that drafty old ranch house feel like home." The mention of home hung between them, a word gathering weight with each passing week. Sophia had noticed Owen spending more time in town lately, finding reasons to ride in from the ranch even when supplies weren't needed. And she had begun to plan her days around his visits, anticipating the sound of his horse approaching and the way her name sounded in his deep voice. As they worked side by side in her garden, Owen seemed unusually quiet. Finally, as they were finishing, he turned to her. "Sophia, there's something I need to tell you," her heart stuttered. Was this goodbye? Had he received word to move on, as cowboys often did? "The ranch foreman offered me a permanent position, year-round work with my own cabin on the property." Relief washed through her. "Owen, that's wonderful news. It means I'll be staying in Kansas, near Newton." His blue eyes held hers. "Near you." The implication was clear, and Sophia felt her cheeks warm. "I'm very glad to hear that." He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "There's more. Mr. Kavanaugh mentioned he's looking to expand the ranch's operations, wants to try growing crops on some of the eastern pastures. He's looking for someone who knows about plants, about making things grow in this harsh climate." Sophia's breath caught. "And you thought of me. You're the most knowledgeable person I know when it comes to growing things. I mentioned your garden, how you've made flowers thrive where most people can barely grow corn." He was impressed. "Owen, I don't know the first thing about large-scale farming, but you understand the land, the soil, what plants need. The practical details can be learned." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "It would mean moving to the ranch. There's a small house, nothing fancy but solid, near the main house. Mrs. Kavanaugh said she'd be pleased to have another woman nearby." Sophia's mind raced. Leave her cabin, her garden. Yet the opportunity he described was beyond anything she could have hoped for: steady employment doing work she loved and proximity to Owen. "I'd need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course, there's no rush." He released her hand reluctantly. "I should head back. Early start tomorrow." As he prepared to leave, Sophia felt a sudden urge to keep him there, to tell him how much his presence in her life had come to mean. But the words stuck in her throat, unfamiliar and frightening in their intensity. Instead, she said, "Will I see you next Saturday?" His smile was warm. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. After he left, Sophia sat on her small porch, watching the stars emerge. The prospect of change loomed before her, exciting and terrifying in equal measure. Her garden was her sanctuary, the only thing that had kept her afloat after her father's death. Could she leave it behind? Yet even as she asked herself the question, she knew the answer. Her garden had saved her life, but it was just plants and soil. The life she truly wanted, one with purpose, security, and perhaps even love, lay elsewhere. With Owen. The realization both startled and steadied her. In just 2 months, this quiet, thoughtful cowboy had become central to her world. She hadn't planned it, hadn't even seen it happening until it was already done. And based on the way he looked at her, the care he took with her garden and her dreams, she suspected he felt the same. The following Saturday dawned clear and cold. Frost sparkled on the grass as Sophia prepared her cart with the last of her fall blooms. The harvest celebration at the church was approaching, and she had promised Mrs. Thornton a special delivery. Between that and the weekly flowers for Mrs. Kavanaugh, her garden would be nearly bare, ready for winter dormancy. Market day was busy, with townsfolk preparing for the upcoming celebration. Sophia sold most of her flowers by noon, setting aside the special arrangements for the church and the ranch. As she was packing up, Reverend Thornton approached her cart. "Miss Pierce, just the person I wanted to see." "Reverend, I have your flowers ready." She gestured to the carefully arranged bouquets. "They're lovely, as always, but that's not why I sought you out." He lowered his voice slightly. "There's a matter I thought you should be aware of. It concerns Mr. Prescott." Sophia's heart quickened. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong, precisely, but there's been talk. You're a young woman alone, Miss Pierce, and Mr. Prescott has been calling on you regularly. People have noticed." Heat rose to Sophia's cheeks. "We've done nothing improper, Reverend. I'm certain of that. But perception matters in a small town like ours. For your reputation's sake, I felt I should mention it." Sophia straightened her spine. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend, but Mr. Prescott has been a perfect gentleman. He's helped me maintain my garden and secure steady work." "I see no reason for gossip." The Reverend nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "As I suspected you'd say. He's a good man by all accounts. I simply wanted to be sure you were aware of the situation." "Thank you, Reverend. Is there anything else?" "Just one thing. If Mr. Prescott's intentions are honorable, as I believe they are, perhaps it's time those intentions were made clear. For both your sakes." With that cryptic statement, he accepted his flowers and bid her good day, leaving Sophia to ponder his words as she waited for Owen. He arrived later than usual, looking somewhat harried. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and there was a tightness around his eyes that spoke of stress. "I apologize for the delay," he said, dismounting quickly. "There was trouble at the ranch, a fence down and cattle scattered. Took most of the day to round them up. No apology needed. You're here now." She studied his face, noting the tension. "Is everything all right? Beyond the cattle, I mean." Owen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Actually, there's something I need to discuss with you. Could we walk a bit?" They left her cart with Mrs. Henderson at the general store and walked toward the edge of town, Owen uncharacteristically silent. Finally, as they reached the outskirts, he stopped. "Sophia, I've been thinking about what I said last week about the job at the ranch." "Yes. There's something I didn't fully explain." He took a deep breath. "Mr. Kavanaugh is willing to hire you, but he's an old-fashioned man. He doesn't think it's proper for a single woman to live alone on the ranch, even in a separate house. Sophia felt her hopes deflate. I see. But there's a solution. Owen took her hands in his blue eyes intense. One I've been considering for some time now, though perhaps not quite so soon. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, and Sophia's heart nearly stopped. Sophia Pierce, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me that a man can be more than a drifter, that he can find a place to belong, a person to belong with. I know this is sudden, and I'll understand if you need time, but he swallowed hard. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? The world seemed to still around them. Sophia looked down at this man, this kind, hard-working, gentle man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed it so completely. "Owen," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Are you certain? This isn't just about the job," he shook his head vehemently. "The job is an excuse, a catalyst perhaps, but not the reason. I've known since that first day I saw you with your flowers that you were special. I've spent every day since then falling more deeply in love with you. I would ask you to be my wife if we were to live in a tent on the prairie." Tears blurred her vision. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I will marry you." Owen stood and pulled her into his arms, his embrace solid and warm. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar somehow, though it was their first. "I don't have a ring yet," he murmured against her hair, "but I will." "I don't need a ring, I just need you." They walked back to town hand in hand, plans and dreams tumbling out in excited conversation. They would be married in 2 weeks, a simple ceremony at the church. They would move to the ranch before the first heavy snows. Sophia would transplant what she could from her garden, starting anew on Kavanaugh land. As they approached the center of town, Sophia noticed people watching them, smiling knowingly at their clasped hands. "I think the Reverend knew this was coming before I did," she said with a small laugh. Owen chuckled. "I may have spoken with him yesterday, and with Mr. Henderson about a ring, and Mrs. Thornton about the church." His cheeks reddened slightly. "I wanted everything to be ready, just in case you said yes." Sophia squeezed his hand. "I was always going to say yes. I think part of me has known that since you bought my entire garden." 2 weeks later, on a crisp November morning, Sophia stood in the back of Newton's small church, a bouquet of the last roses from her garden trembling in her hands. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her alter, with a crown of baby's breath in her hair. As the small congregation rose and turned to watch her walk down the aisle, Sophia saw only Owen. He stood tall and proud beside Reverend Thornton, dressed in a new black suit, his blonde hair neatly combed. The love in his eyes as he watched her approach made her feel like the most beautiful woman in Kansas. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. They exchanged simple gold bands. Owen had insisted on saving enough for proper rings and vows that promised faithfulness, respect, and devotion through whatever life might bring. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thornton declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Their first kiss as a married couple was sweet and full of promise, accompanied by applause from the small gathering of friends and neighbors who had come to wish them well. The reception was held at the hotel dining room, a simple affair with cake and punch and many good wishes. Mr. and Mrs. Kavanaugh had come to town for the occasion, Mrs. Kavanaugh's condition now visibly advanced. "My dear," she said, embracing Sophia warmly, "I cannot tell you how pleased I am to have you joining us at Diamond Cross. Your flowers have brought me such joy these past months. Thank you for the opportunity, Mrs. Kavanaugh. I'm eager to begin. Eleanor, please, we'll be neighbors after all." She glanced at Owen, who was deep in conversation with her husband. "He's a good man, your cowboy. Arthur says he's the most reliable hand on the ranch." "I know," Sophia said simply, watching her husband with pride. As the celebration wound down, Owen approached with a mysterious smile. "Ready for a surprise, Mrs. Prescott?" The name still sent a thrill through her. "What kind of surprise? You'll see." He led her outside where a small wagon waited, hitched to his chestnut stallion and Daisy. The wagon bed was covered with a tarp. "What's this?" "Our transportation to the ranch." He helped her up to the seat, then climbed up beside her. "And a wedding gift of sorts." As they left town, waved off by their well-wishers, Owen directed the horses west toward their new home. After they had traveled a mile, he stopped the wagon and turned to Sophia. "I need to show you something." He jumped down and went to the back of the wagon, pulling aside the tarp to reveal several wooden crates filled with soil and carefully wrapped plants. "My garden." Sophia gasped, recognizing the rose bushes and perennials from her plot behind the cabin. "But how?" "I went back yesterday with some of the boys from the ranch. We dug up everything that could be transplanted. Mr. Finch didn't mind, he's already rented the cabin to the new schoolteacher." Owen looked up at her anxiously. "I hope it was the right thing to do. I know how much your garden means to you." Tears filled Sophia's eyes. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect." She climbed down from the wagon and threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Owen, for understanding what they mean to me." He held her close. "I wanted our new life to include pieces of what mattered in your old one." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Besides, I fell in love with the flower girl of Newton. Seemed only right she should bring her flowers along." They arrived at Diamond Cross Ranch as the sun was setting, casting long golden rays across the rolling pastures. The main house was a substantial two-story structure, with several outbuildings clustered nearby. Owen drove past these to a small but sturdy cabin about a quarter-mile from the main house. "Here we are," he said softly. "Home." He helped Sophia down, then swept her into his arms before she could take a step toward the house. "Tradition," he explained with a grin, carrying her across the threshold. The cabin was simple but welcoming. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bedroom visible through an open door. Someone Mrs. Kavanaugh, Sophia suspected, had placed vases of dried flowers around the room and laid a colorful quilt on the bed. "It's not much," Owen said, watching her face anxiously, "but it's a start." Sophia turned to him, her heart full. "It's everything." In the fading light, they unloaded her rescued plants, setting them carefully beside the cabin for planting the next day. As darkness fell, Owen built a fire in the hearth while Sophia unpacked the few belongings they had brought. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a joining that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if their souls had known each other long before their bodies met. Afterward, lying in Owen's arms with the firelight casting shadows on the walls, Sophia felt a contentment she had never known before. "Happy," Owen murmured against her hair, "completely. And you, more than I ever thought possible." As winter settled over the Kansas prairie, Sophia and Owen established their new life at Diamond Cross. She worked with Mr. Kavanaugh to plan spring plantings, studying agricultural journals and drawing on her knowledge of soil and growing conditions. Owen continued his work with the cattle, but also helped prepare the eastern fields for crops, learning alongside Sophia about this new venture. Their little cabin became a home, warm and inviting despite the howling winds that sometimes swept across the plains. In a sheltered area behind the house, Owen built a cold frame where Sophia nurtured seedlings through the winter months, planning for her new garden come spring. Christmas brought a heavy snowfall and a gathering at the main house. The Kavanaughs hosted all the ranch hands and their families for dinner, with Sophia's dried flower arrangements decorating the long tables. Owen gave her a silver locket containing a pressed flower from her original garden. She gave him a hand-knitted scarf and a journal bound in soft leather for recording ranch business. As the new year dawned, so did a new life. Mrs. Cavanaugh gave birth to a healthy baby boy in early January, with Sophia assisting the doctor during the delivery. The bond between the two women grew stronger as Sophia helped care for the infant in those first challenging weeks. By March, the snow was melting, and the first green shoots were appearing in Sophia's cold frames. She and Owen spent evenings planning their garden, a much larger version of her plot in town. He built raised beds and a small greenhouse using glass windows salvaged from an abandoned homestead. Together, they prepared the soil as they had prepared their marriage with care, attention, and hope for what would grow. April brought the first plantings, both in their garden and in the ranch's new fields. Sophia divided her time between the crops and her flowers, finding that her knowledge transferred well to the larger scale. Mr. Cavanaugh, initially skeptical of some of her methods, became a convert when the first seedlings emerged stronger and more numerous than in previous attempts. By summer, the Prescott garden was the pride of Diamond Cross. Vegetables for their table grew alongside flowers that Sophia still sold in Newton on occasion. She also supplied the church regularly and taught several of the neighboring women her techniques for growing and drying blooms. On their first anniversary in November, Owen took Sophia on a ride to a hill overlooking the ranch. Below them, the buildings looked small against the vast landscape, but the fields were visible as ordered patches of earth, now resting after the harvest. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Owen said, his arm around her waist as they sat on a blanket, sharing a picnic lunch. "The fastest and fullest year of my life," Sophia agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Any regrets about leaving your cabin, your independence?" She looked up at him, surprised. "None. Why would you ask that?" Owen shrugged slightly. "Sometimes I worry that I took you away from a life you had built for yourself, that I asked too much too soon." Sophia turned to face him fully. "Owen Prescott, listen to me. The life I had was survival, nothing more. I was alone, struggling to keep a roof over my head." She took his face in her hands. "You didn't take me away from anything. You gave me everything: a partner, a purpose, a home, a family." At the last word, her hands dropped to her still flat stomach, a smile playing at her lips. Owen's eyes widened. "Sophia, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "In late spring, according to Mrs. Henderson. I wanted to be certain before I told you." With a whoop of joy, Owen lifted her off the ground, spinning her in a circle before carefully setting her down again. "A baby, our family," Sophia corrected, laughing at his enthusiasm. "The three of us." He kissed her then, a kiss full of love and dreams and promises. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For selling flowers in Newton, for catching my eye that day, for saying yes when a dusty cowboy asked to see your garden." His voice grew thick with emotion. "For loving me." Sophia smiled, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. "Best decision I ever made." As they rode back to their cabin, the setting sun gilding the prairie, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate flower seller to a rancher's wife, from mere survival to abundant life, all because a kind-hearted cowboy had bought her entire garden one summer day. Their son, Jonathan Arthur Prescott, was born on a warm May morning in 1879, with Mrs. Cavanaugh and the local midwife attending. He had Owen's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to become Sophia's chestnut brown. Owen, who had paced outside until the first cry, burst into tears when Sophia placed the tiny bundle in his arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, counting fingers and toes with wonder. "Absolutely perfect." Life adjusted to include this new precious person. Sophia carried Jonathan in a sling as she tended her garden, singing songs her mother had sung to her. Owen built a cradle that could rock with the touch of a foot, allowing Sophia to soothe the baby while her hands remained free for other tasks. As Jonathan grew, so did the ranch's reputation for quality crops and livestock. The techniques Sophia had introduced were proving successful, and neighboring ranches began to consult with Diamond Cross on agricultural matters. Owen was promoted to foreman when the previous one retired, a position that came with increased responsibility and compensation. By their third anniversary, they had outgrown the small cabin. With Mr. Kavanaugh's blessing and assistance, they began construction on a larger home near the original site. Owen insisted on a proper parlor for Sophia to entertain visitors, and a large kitchen where she could preserve the garden's bounty. Most importantly, there would be several bedrooms for the children they hoped would join Jonathan. They moved into their new home in the spring of 1881, just as Sophia discovered she was expecting their second child. The garden moved with them, expanded and improved with each passing season. Sophia now supplied flowers to several establishments in Newton and had begun experimenting with herbs and medicinal plants, studying books Owen ordered from back east. Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Prescott, arrived in November 1881, a quiet baby with serious eyes who watched the world with apparent curiosity from her earliest days. Jonathan, now 2.5, approached his sister with solemn responsibility, bringing her toys and patting her head with careful hands. The years flowed one into another, marked by seasons of planting and harvest, by children's birthdays and anniversaries, by the gradual growth of both the ranch and the Prescott family. A third child, William James, joined them in 1884, completing their family. Through it all, Sophia's garden remained the heart of their home. Owen built a white picket fence around it, a touch of civilization in the rugged landscape and paths wide enough for children to help without trampling precious plants. Each child had a small plot to tend, learning the patience and care that growing things required. Newton grew as well, the railroad bringing more settlers and businesses. When the children were old enough for formal schooling, Owen and Sophia faced a decision: send them to board in town or continue their education at home. They chose a middle path, hiring a tutor who came to Diamond Cross 3 days a week, serving the Prescott children and those of other ranch employees. In 1888, Mr. Kavanaugh suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. With no son old enough to take over operations, he turned increasingly to Owen for management of the ranch. By 1890, Owen was effectively running Diamond Cross, with Sophia overseeing the agricultural operations that had expanded to include fruit orchards and experimental grain varieties. That winter, Mr. Kavanaugh called them to the main house for a serious conversation. Seated in his wheelchair by the fire, his speech still slurred from his stroke, he laid out a proposal that would change their lives once more. "Marion and I never had more children after Arthur," he said, referring to his son who was now 11. "He's a good boy, but young, and his interests lie more with books than beeves." He looked at Owen steadily. "This ranch needs a future, and you two have given it one. We want to make you partners now with an eye toward ownership when Marion and I are gone." Owen and Sophia exchanged stunned glances. "Mr. Kavanaugh, that's incredibly generous," Owen began. "It's practical. the older man corrected. You've increased the value of Diamond Cross threefold in 10 years. You've earned this. And so, at 38 and 36 respectively, Owen and Sophia Prescott became part owners of one of the most prosperous ranches in central Kansas. The legal papers were drawn up, the arrangements made official. Their children would have a legacy beyond anything they could have imagined when they first met in Newton 13 years earlier. That night, after the children were asleep, Sophia and Owen sat on the porch of their home, looking out at the stars that sparkled over their land. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sophia asked, her hand in his. "When you bought my flowers that day?" Owen smiled, the laugh lines around his eyes deeper now, but his gaze still as blue and clear as ever. "I imagined being with you. The rest was just hope." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and earth and home. "Remember how desperate I was that day? $3 short on rent and facing eviction. And I was just a cowboy with a $5 gold piece and a sudden need for flowers. You saved me." Owen shook his head, turning to look into her eyes. "No, my love, we saved each other. I was drifting, rootless. You gave me something to grow toward, a reason to plant myself in one place." Sophia kissed him then, a kiss as sweet and familiar as the first had been thrilling and new. "When they parted," she said, "we should visit my old garden spot sometime. Show the children where it all began." "We will. But your garden is here now, bigger and more beautiful than ever, just like our life together." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the prairie that had become their home, Sophia reflected on the journey from that desperate market day in Newton. She had been selling flowers to survive, and a kind-hearted cowboy had bought her entire garden. What neither of them had known then was that he had also bought her heart, or perhaps more accurately, they had given their hearts to each other, a fair exchange that had blossomed into a life neither could have imagined alone. The following spring, they did visit Newton and the site of Sophia's original garden. The cabin had been replaced by a larger home, but the current owners, learning of the Prescott's history, invited them to see the backyard where a garden still flourished, though with different flowers and a different purpose. Jonathan, Elizabeth, and William listened wide-eyed as their parents recounted the story of their meeting, the flowers, and the fateful purchase that had changed everything. "And that's why we always have flowers in our house," Elizabeth concluded with the certainty of a 9-year-old who has solved a mystery. "That's right," Owen agreed, lifting his daughter onto his shoulders for the walk back to their wagon. "Because flowers remind us of beginnings, and how beautiful things can grow from small seeds if they're tended with love." As they drove back to Diamond Cross, the prairie stretching endless and open around them, Sophia looked at her family, her handsome husband guiding the horses, her children laughing in the back of the wagon, the life they had built together from such unlikely beginnings, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. Not just surviving, but thriving, like the flowers that had brought them together, now blooming in abundance in the rich soil of home,